Let's start with the very basics here, Frank. I mean, can we now officially stop talking about the 49ers, leave them for dead? Can you and I just bury the plot, throw them in there, and say, see you next year?
Yep. I mean, you got to win that game. I mean, first time in Rams 49ers series history, 152 meetings that neither team scores a touchdown. And I thought the play that summed up the 49ers season was Deebo Samuel complains during the week about not getting the ball. They obviously are force feeding him. Why? I don't know, but they were. And Purdy on a third down, a key third down in the third quarter, hits him in stride. Like, I mean, the most beautiful play they had all night, and Deebo just drops it. And that's the 49ers right there. Like, star players having a disappointing season, and when they have a chance to come through and do something, the ball bounces off their hands into the ground. That sums it all up. Big win for the Rams, though. I don't care how ugly it was. The Rams are just trying to collect wins now. And now I kind of think the Rams are going to win that division. I kind of, in my math of having Seattle winning a division, I had the Rams losing last night. Obviously picked that on Wednesday. That's a big win for them, and I think they go on to win the NFC West now. I mean, they have a lot of momentum. They're playing really well. Sean McVay, what an absolute, just a legend he is in the sport already at his age. So big win for the Rams, and yes, the 49ers are absolutely done.
This Rams team started 1-4, and now they've won 7 of their last 9. I would also like to note for the record that when Stone texted me on Wednesday being like, who do you want for Thursday night? I was like, Rams, but I responded late, and he was like, sorry, C-Rob picked the Niners for you. So that's on me, and I probably would have thanked C-Rob had the 49ers done it. But, I mean, this Rams team is really figuring it out. We got to give a lot of credit to Sean McVay. Also, this is the first time, I think it was since 2018, that the Rams swept the Niners during the season. There were all those years where even when the Rams would be playing really well, Shanahan kind of had one on McVay. And I just think when you look at whether it's their rookie defensive lineman on Los Angeles, or it's just the way that Puka Nacua is catching, a 50-plus yard ball from Matthew Stafford, they're really figuring a lot of things out, despite the fact that they should be in, still one of their rebuild years, and they're really not.
Okay, so now, there's a couple of things that come out of this. Number one, by the way, Jori, you weren't there. I did pick the Rams, so I'm on a heater.
Wow,
but one right is a heater for me this year. That's how it goes. But this does raise a real question, because this was supposed to be the year that questions were answered for the 49ers, right? Like the Brock Purdy question was going to be clear by the end of the year, and everybody was going to have a good understanding of exactly where this team is. I feel like we spent so much of the year trying to figure out why this team is underperforming. Now, all of a sudden, it's like we woke up and we got here. And now, as an organization, they're going to figure out, what is Brock Purdy? Who is Brock Purdy? Because we're at that pay time. So, Jori, you look at all of this together and try to figure out where the 49ers are on their quarterback. Do you think that we're still in that long-term deal area that we thought we might be in a few months ago?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it reminds me of conversations I had at the league meetings this week regarding the Cowboys and Dak Prescott. And I think, again, there are different points, and you can make what you want of the $60 million that Dak's making. But I think when it comes down to it, whether it's Dak, whether it's head coach Mike McCarthy with the Cowboys, the way that a lot of people in that building are looking at it is so few players, especially if your name is not Patrick Mahomes, are going to be able to perform at the highest level if they don't have their star player. Now, what if you don't have Christian McCaffrey or Jordan Mason or Brandon Ayuk? Oh, I think Trent Williams has not played a lot of these games. I mean, it was just one thing after the next. And so you could say that, well, if a quarterback's making $55, 60, $65 million a year, that they should be able to elevate everyone around them. But there's a difference between elevating everyone around them and being able to completely cover and play essentially 8 of the 11 positions on the field. I just don't think that's realistic. So I think that it will be maybe not the same taste in their mouth when they give Brock Purdy that deal, but I don't think that anyone should really be questioning whether Brock Purdy deserves that deal. What do you guys think?
I've always said the same thing over and over. Do you think the 49ers can win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy making $60 million a year? 55 or 65 or whatever it is, in that range. If your answer is no, you got to do something else. I cannot stand the lack of logic behind, well, of course you can't. Most quarterbacks, you can't win a championship with them making $60 million, but you got to pay them anyway. What are we doing? The whole goal of this is winning a championship. I've always said I don't believe the 49ers can win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy making in the $60 million range, and I'll stick to that. So if that's your answer, my counterpoint is Kyle Shanahan's the cheat code. I think he's the best offensive coach in football. The people who want to get him fired right now, come on. I see that every once in a while on social media. I'm like, this is one of the dumbest takes I've ever seen. Kyle Shanahan is a coach who elevates everyone, including the quarterback. Did it with Jimmy G, did it with Brock Purdy, could do it with another guy he drafted. So that's always been my answer. But If your answer is yes, the 49ers could win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy making $60 million a year, okay, cool. Go ahead and sign him. But if your answer to that is no, then you got to try something different. You got to be more creative. We can't just keep pounding our heads against the wall saying, well, this is what everybody else does. Guess we need to do it too.
Okay, but Frank, to me, the question would be not are they going to win a Super Bowl, but are they more likely and ideally substantially more likely to win one with Brock Purdy than the alternative? To me, the two most likely alternatives are they draft a guy or they get like an Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins types for a year. We know Shanahan's kind of like things about Kirk Cousins. He thinks he could probably save Rodgers. Rodgers could go home to the Bay Area where he's from, all of that. I don't think that the Rodgers thing is going to work. I mean, again, we saw this with the Jets. The Jets had a lot of talents on that offense, and it did not look good for most of this year. And then drafting, so you want to trade up to get Trey Lance rather than pay $60 million a year? I would rather Brock Purdy than trade up for Trey Lance again, which is what we've seen Kyle Shanahan. Like, we cannot trust Kyle Shanahan to draft a quarterback.
Always the example? Trey Lance was not a good fit. He is a improvisational quarterback.
Because that's who Kyle Shanahan traded up to draft.
I don't think you want it. I don't think Kyle wanted him.
That is the quarterback that Kyle Shanahan wanted.
I don't think Kyle wanted him to be
honest. He lucked into Brock Purdy.
But yes, he did. Absolutely.
Even if Kyle didn't want him, Frank.
Why is Trey Lance the example? Why is Trey Lance the example? Why isn't he Jimmy G?
Because nothing's changed. Because nothing's changed in the organization. It's the same GM and the same head coach. So, and Jori, you would know more about whether or not Kyle wanted him. But even if Kyle didn't want him, the same GM's going to be like, what has changed about the drafting situation this year that would make it suddenly different for the 49ers? I don't know if Kyle wanted him, but I know that the 49ers decided as a group, the same group that's in the building right now, decided to draft Trey Lance. And it's one of the larger fails in recent NFL draft. Like when you trade up, you trade a king's ransom and you take a quarterback that high and you lose out. The great thing is that they got lucky. And so that's okay. But you want to rely on getting lucky again? I don't.
But I think, again, it comes back to, and you got, again, answer the question, Claire. Again, I'll use Jori's words. Are you more likely to win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy making $60 million or trying what's behind door two? And if your answer is yes, I'm cool with that. But if your answer is no, I don't think so. Okay, then I'm fine with that. But if your answer is no, then you got to try something else.
But here's the thing, Frank. It's not that I have talked to Kyle. It's not that I have talked to Kyle Shanahan about this decision one-on-one or anything like that. But you have to understand how the 49ers work if you talk to people in the 49ers or around the league. Kyle runs that team. This is not a knock on John Lynch. This is just their way that Kyle operates and the degree of influence he has because he has earned that. He has had that kind of success. I mean, again, we're going to get into the Bill Belichick talks on what he wants and what control looks like for head coaches in the league. I'm trying to think if there is any coach, if so, maybe under 5 who have more influence on their roster management than Kyle Shanahan, particularly on the offensive side of the ball and particularly at quarterback. This is a guy who he runs a scheme. I know we got a lot of knocks that Brock Purdy's a system quarterback, but as I wrote about during the Super Bowl week this past year, this is actually more that Brock Purdy is the quarterback that works extremely well for Kyle Shanahan's system, which is a hugely beneficial thing to be this year. And so you cannot tell me that they drafted a quarterback for Kyle Shanahan's system without Kyle Shanahan wanting him.
Okay, that's fair. But why do we go with, well, they screwed up with Trey Lance, so they can never try that again? Why isn't it, well, they hit Brock Purdy, they could do that again? Why? Why do we just revert to, Trey Lance didn't work out, so we can't try it again?
Hitting Brock Purdy was luck. If they thought,
but why is it not hitting Trey Lance bad luck?
It's the same reason.
Why is it not hitting Trey Lance bad luck? I'll tell you why it's luck. I feel like this must be combative Friday. I didn't realize we were going into this.
Yes, it's Friday.
I know. I didn't realize that. I wasn't expecting this. I know that that's what you guys do, a C-Rob, but I thought that was a C-Rob thing, not a Friday thing. But I'll tell you what. I talked to Rams general manager Les Snead this past summer about Puka Nacua and about what did you see in Puka Nacua and what were you able to figure out that the league wasn't able to. And what the Rams and everyone else will tell you is that if they really thought Puka was going to be what Puka was his rookie year, setting all of these records, they weren't drafting him in the 5th round. They would have drafted him in the 2nd round. So too, if the 49ers really believed in Brock Purdy, they were not drafting him with the final pick. They literally drafted him then because they're like, oh, someone else is going to pay him more as a priority free agent if he goes undrafted. And so, yes, there's a big case that one of the things that Brock Purdy had, we're seeing play out across the league with the first rounders this year, which is that the more college experience you have, the better. And so Brock Purdy came in with a ton of experience at the college level, the same way Jaden Daniels has, the same way Bo Nix has. But they would not have let him go until that final pick when 200-something picks could have drafted him before they did if they believed in him. That was luck.
I agree with that, but
Let me ask you
it
this,
was
Frank.
luck, but they still
Let-
identified him. Like, they still got him. Like, they could do it again.
But still, let me ask you this. You and I, we like to dabble. So let's say we're in Vegas. And let's say we're in Vegas and I walk up to the roulette table and I take every dollar that I have ever made in my life and I put it all on black. All right? And it doesn't hit. And 2 years later, I come back and I put every dollar that I've ever made in my life on black again. And this time it hits. All right? A couple years after that, you and I go back to the roulette table and I got a big old wad of cash. What are you telling me to do? Are you telling me, are we looking at the fact that I got unlucky the first time or that I got lucky the second time? As a friend, you would look at me and you say, you have lost your damn mind. Put your money away. Don't put it on. That's what I think happens in the quarterback roulette. It's quarterback roulette.
In this example, black is Trey Lance, and you lost the first time on Trey Lance, and you're saying, well, you could never try black again. Like, that's obviously never going to hit. Like, well, yes, they screwed up the Trey Lance pick. I get that. He wasn't a great fit for Kyle Shanahan's offense. I don't think that means that you can't, like, go find another quarterback. I think that the Brock Purdy example, yes, they got lucky. For sure they got lucky with Brock Purdy. But they also identified Brock Purdy. They also developed Brock Purdy. Kyle Shanahan got the absolute most out of Brock Purdy. I think Kyle's the cheat code here. And that's why I've said over and over, look, we all agree, all of us. I think people who aren't on this podcast, people who are listening, the three of us, the biggest edge right now you can have in the entire sporting landscape is a good quarterback on his rookie deal. Why doesn't any team leverage this? Why doesn't any team say, wait a second, we all agree that's the biggest edge you can have in sports. We're going to keep trying to do that. We're just going to keep flipping. We're going to keep, you know what, Brock Purdy, you've had a great run, but now we're going to trade you. We're going to trade you for a couple first round picks, whatever they can get, whatever it would be in a trade. And we're just going to keep this cycle going because we understand where nobody else does and nobody has the guts to do it. We understand this is the biggest edge in sports. Nobody else is doing this. This is the Moneyball thing almost, right? Like, we're doing something nobody else is because nobody else has the guts to leverage the biggest advantage in the sporting landscape at this moment.
I question that there are 32 capable people in the world right now that could be actual bona fide starting quarterbacks. And every time
and they're definitely not 32 better than Brock Purdy, maybe 12.
But you know what? There's not 32 coaches better than Kyle Shanahan at developing. I wouldn't recommend this for every team. I would recommend this for the Jets.
I think you make a good point in theory, but I think it struggles to hold up in practice because I was thinking about this week because I went to the Minnesota Vikings during OTAs right after they hired head coach Kevin O'Connell and general manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. I sat down with both of them, and one of the things that Kwesi told me is that when he was looking for a quarterback, yes, you want to get the Tom Brady, yes, you want to get the Patrick Mahomes, but given how hard it is to find those guys who have been proven to win Super Bowls, what he thought is that having a coach like Kevin O'Connell would allow him to get that extra bump of, hey, he believed Kevin would be able to elevate that quarterback. He believed that certain things they did in the scheme would be able to get them a few more yards on first and second down to set them up for third down. Certain things would be able to get him a couple more checks that would keep him from getting that sack. And I think we've seen that play out, whether it's with the various quarterbacks that the Vikings went through last year after Kirk Cousins went down. Kirk Cousins himself playing better in Minnesota than anywhere else he's played. And now we're seeing that with Sam Darnold. The problem is that when you go to San Francisco, yes, Kyle Shanahan in theory should do that, but what is the sample size? Like, who is the evidence that he's done that with? Jimmy G, yes, he probably elevated to some degree, but even that, he kind of didn't want to work with him anymore.
What are you talking about? Jimmy G almost won a Super Bowl. Like, if they covered Chip Watts, they win a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yes, but I think what you have to remember is, okay, and Jared Goff almost won a Super Bowl with Sean McVay, and Sean McVay's like, I'm done with this guy. I need Matthew Stafford. And so when you have coaches like Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan, it's one, can they elevate them? And two, are they willing to elevate them? And Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay are not willing to elevate all of them. I mean, our colleague Charles Robinson has written about this at length, is that Kyle is so particular and so specific that it's not just about the scheme. It's like when he's out on you, he is out on you and he gives up on you and he is not willing to coach you anymore. And so the fact that he is not out on Brock Purdy at this point, from everything we know, that is actually really valuable because you need the coach's buy-in. It sounds stupid. It sounds like grow up, be an adult, and just like work with anyone. But these coaches are not willing to do that.
I know we got to wrap this Brock Purdy conversation, move on. I would just remind everybody, we're all sitting here saying Brock's got to go get paid, right? Like, we all know that. The reality of it is they have another year.
I liked it.
Paid. The reality of it is he's got another year left on his deal at a fraction. And if they really wanted to, they could basically play chicken. Force Brock to figure out what he wants to do. They could wait a whole nother year and then they could franchise.
Oh, he'd hold out. He's got to hold out.
You think? I mean,
if I'm Brock Purdy's agent, I'm like, bro, you're not playing for $790,000 again this year. If we're just not, like, sorry, like
everybody holds out in San Francisco, and it always works.
Yeah,
I'll give you
I was
that.
going to say,
It
that's
always
the
works.
biggest thing the Niners have going against them. When you talk to people around the league about one of the reasons that the Eagles are able to get the degree of talent retained that they are. I mean, keeping A.J. Brown, keeping Devonta Smith, keeping Jalen Hurts, getting Saquon Barkley. It's because Howie gets ahead of deals. He structures them in certain ways, but he also does them earlier. If you're in San Francisco, and I've seen this with Dallas through the years too, you know they're going to cave toward the end. They get those deals done at the end. Brandon Ayuk can be so mad and be going to the Steelers and the Cleveland Browns, and he's coming back. And so the question is, what is Brock Purdy willing to do? Because from a purely financial standpoint, I believe that the Niners would cave during training camp. I just don't know if from a quarterback standpoint you want to do that.
Yeah, Roseman had easier decisions with every name you just mentioned than the 49ers have with Brock Purdy. That's fair. All right, we can talk about Brock Purdy for an hour. It gets out of control. We haven't even hit the biggest piece of news from this thing, which is De'Vondre Campbell left the game in the third quarter, just walked off. And, Shanahan was asked afterwards and, why he left, and he said he didn't want to play. And 49ers players have been sounding off on this. I mean, De'Vondre Campbell just quit on his team, which we've seen a few times in the NFL over the years. Like there have been a few instances of it, but it's rare. And Frank, it's pretty jarring to see, especially because this just continues to be another moment for like a few months ago. It felt like the 49ers were just one of the most stable organizations in the sport. And now all of a sudden you're looking around, it's like, God, injuries and contracts, and you got a player quitting in the middle of a game. It just feels like we're living in a different universe right now.
A little bit. I don't want to, because Shanahan did take some questions about basically, is this a reflection of what's going on? He's like, this is one guy who didn't want to play football. Like, what can we do about that? Like, he made his choice, and now we're going to move on. I try not to laugh too much because this kind of was a serious issue for the 49ers, but De'Vondre Campbell, just when Kyle Shanahan goes up, like this is, I'm piecing this together for what Kyle said post-game, right? We don't have De'Vondre's side of the story yet, I don't believe. Kyle goes up to him and is like, I hear you don't want to go into the game. Why aren't you going into the game? And De'Vondre Campbell looks dead at him and says, I don't want to play today. And he just bounces. He's just out. He just leaves. Like, unbelievable. Like, there are guys who have not gone into games. Like Deontay Johnson just did it. Like, he didn't want to go into the week 13 game, got suspended week 14. I remember going way in the Wayback Machine, Fitz. Todd Marinovich famously was partying in New Orleans. All of a sudden, he's got to go in the game. Archell looks his way. He's like, kid, you ready to go in? And he's like, nope, I can't go in. Probably because he's so hungover. So it's happened before. The only time this brought to mind two other instances in NFL history. The absolutely famous Vontae Davis incident, where at the end of they're playing week one. He's in his first game with the Buffalo Bills, and he just doesn't go back into the game. And guys are like, well, "That's kind of weird." He's like, "I'm done," and they thought he was like saying, "I'm done for the half" or something like that. They go into halftime and he retires. He's like, "I'm done. I'm out, guys. I'll see you later," and just retires at halftime and leaves. The other one is obviously Antonio Brown. Who,
I was gonna say
in one of the most crazy scenarios, and all my time covering the NFL and absolutely covering it for Yahoo, I remember looking at, like, what's that? Antonio Brown's got his shirt off and he's like dancing in the end zone and he's running and he's giving a peace sign. What am I watching here? Antonio Brown just quit in the middle of a game, went to the locker room, never played in the NFL again. I think it's pretty safe to say De'Vondre Campbell, who, by the way, has had a very good career. 9-year career. He's started all season for the San Francisco 49ers, but his playing snaps were going down each week the past 3 weeks. Dre Greenlaw came and took his starting spot, played a whole game. So De'Vondre hadn't played. He was obviously, I assume, salty about that. But I think we can assume De'Vondre Campbell's never played in the NFL again, because there are some things you just don't do. You could get away with a lot of stuff in the NFL. We could talk about they'll let this guy play, but whatever. The one thing you really can't do is quit on your team in the middle of a game and go to the locker room and just leave. Like you're never coming back from that.
Right. I mean, you look at the De'Vondre Campbell thing, and the funny element would be like, hey, at least he didn't take off his shirt in the middle and like create an actual distraction in that regard. Like, he was a little more subtle with his mid-game quit. But I think that when I look at what the Niners were saying after the game, I mean, I think we all have heard George Kittle talk. I've had conversations with him directly if we haven't all done that. But George Kittle is one of like the nicest, most jolly guys in the entire NFL. Super thoughtful, always trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, everything. And he was going off being like, it's one person making a selfish decision. I've never been around anybody that's ever done that. And I hope I'm never around anybody who does that again.
He sounded like you wanted to fight him, right? That's how I took it. And I mean, like
this is something that you really let your team down. And it is hard to come back from. I mean, all of these guys are saying that. Like Kyle Shanahan was kind of a little more even-keeled, even if clearly unhappy, because he was trying to be like, hey, I'm not just representing myself, I'm representing the organization. But the leaders of the team were not happy. You can't do that. I mean, again, if you want to say, well, some guys could come back from that, first of all, as we know in the NFL, as in most parts of life, you have to be extremely talented to come back from it. He's not at the caliber of like, hey, Fred Warner does this, which by the way, Fred Warner was probably so mad because he's like the best linebacker in the league and someone's quitting on him.
He's playing with a fractured ankle.
Yeah, right. Like think about what the other guys are going through around you.
Unbelievable.
First, but even so, like you want to say, no, if you're really impactful, you can't do this. Anthony Richardson at quarterback, the most impactful position in the game. I'm not saying it's the only position in the game, but clearly it touches the ball every snap, blah, blah, blah. He left for one play and he got benched for it. This guy left for a half a game and he's less talented and less important to the team. And so it's definitely something that's really frustrating. I think what's frustrating is if you looked at the next gen stats probability of making the playoffs that were on the screens during the broadcast last night, the San Francisco 49ers, if they won last night, had a 10% chance to make the playoffs. And if they lost, had a 1/10% chance to make the playoffs. So essentially the loss ruled them out of the playoffs unless 99.9% of the possible outcomes do not happen. So a linebacker could have helped there.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, because Drake Greenlaw went down in the second half. That's why they needed him. And he's just like, nah, I'm good. I'll see you guys later. Unbelievable.
He's really got to be out, too, because anytime you talk to former players, hitting 10 is a big, big deal. Getting to 10 years is such an important part of the legacy portion of this. Is what guys fight for. They get to year 9. Everybody wants that 10th year. For De'Vondre to be so close to it and then be like, I'm out. I know he wasn't playing at the same high caliber. Like he wasn't playing at a level where it was impactful, but he still had football available to him. I think we all agree that he now doesn't. And this 49ers season becomes one of the more curious. Like it is at some point the story of this year. Every year in the NFL, the story of the season is what team surprised us by competing. One of the main stories of this year, when you look at the 49ers, the Bengals, the Jets, are some of the teams that we thought were going to be really good that turned out just being bad. It's not just that they lost football games. It's that those 3 franchises have found a way to be bad this year. So we'll figure out how they rebound moving forward. All right. Jori was at the owners' meetings. A little story broke. I don't know if you guys heard about it. North Carolina, some guy got hired as a head football coach. We'll talk about it in a second. All right, Jori, I'm not going to presume that you were on your flight listening to Wednesday's edition of Inside Coverage, but for anybody that didn't,
I listened to the whole thing.
C-Rob blew my mind.
Big fan right here. Big fan.
Look at that.
First time caller. Long time listener, first time caller.
I like flipping those.
Hang up and listen.
I like a long time caller, first time listener. It really confuses people.
I was texting C-Rob great points about the offensive coordinator hires and how Vrabel was much better at that than Flo.
Wait a second. I didn't get any text with, hey, great points. I don't
there were
get
so
one
many
text.
groups.
Frank,
you can miss me with this
was
conversation.
not a
Y'all
group
are
chat.
always...
It was a direct text. Frank, I couldn't include you because then Fitz would have left out.
Yeah. When's the last time Frank and I text each other all the time because we are friends, right? And then when's the last time C-Rob or Jori included a big old group text of like, wow, look at that play? Never. All right. Never. It's fine. It's fine. But by the way, I've stolen C-Rob's. I've credited him every phoner I've done. When people ask about Vrabel, I'm like, you should be listening to Inside Coverage. But the other thing that C-Rob pointed out that was really smart was talking a lot about Bill and the fact that North Carolina was in part because there wasn't really interest from the league. And, also that the all-time win record is something that looks like it's headed to Andy Reid. All things that sort of blew my mind. It still, though, feels weird today to say Bill Belichick, head coach at North Carolina. Jori, what was the vibe around owners' meetings with this decision?
There was a group of people who very much felt like this was happening. Because again, the news actually broke after most of the owners and executives had just left for their flights. And then there was a group of people who were like, what in the world? Like, this is so weird. We know he's got a 24-year-old girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. But this is still really weird. And I think what it came down to is, first part is, yes, as you guys talked about on Wednesday, Bill Belichick wanted more control than he had the ability to get in the NFL. This is a guy who really the way that he was raised in this league, or the way that he came up in this league, was one where he got to decide a lot of the personnel decisions. He got to decide a lot of the operational decisions. He was not only the schematic guy with a super good, versatile defense every single week, and that's something that he wanted to continue to have in his coaching career. It's easy to say that you will give that up, but if you've never done that in your whole career, why would you start doing that now? North Carolina offered a degree of autonomy and a degree of really power. Even if he says Mike Lombardi's the general manager, that's more like, hey, you do the things I don't want to do, but I'm ultimately the decision maker, both on the personnel side and on the coaching side. So there's that. But what really stuck out to me was the timing of this, because yes, there are 3 head coaching jobs already open in the NFL, and probably a handful or a few less that will continue to become open. But this is not Bill Belichick taking a college job January 20th after all of the jobs have filled and he has interviewed for some. This is Bill Belichick going to the college ranks before officially, publicly exploring the options. And that to me was like, wasn't he going to want to come back to the NFL? He's 14 games away from tying Don Shula, 15 games away from breaking it. I know it depends on whether you're going with playoffs, without playoffs, but that's a record that a lot of people in the Patriots organization and people close to Bill Belichick will tell us that he really does care about that. And what it really came down to is there were executives from several different teams, including and coaching agents and all these different type of people who were at the meetings who I talked to. And they're like, look, Bill Belichick would not take this job without first exploring his NFL options. And so I took that to mean initially, I was like, oh, so no one wanted him. But I think it's a little more nuanced than that, because it could not be that nobody wanted him, but nobody wanted Bill Belichick with the caveats that Bill Belichick wanted. And I think that makes sense. You also have to ask yourselves, would you rather go to the Jacksonville Jaguars or would you rather go to North Carolina? Not everyone would pick the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I understand you have Trevor Lawrence and you have a quarterback and all of that, but I do think there's an element there. What was interesting to me also is when I'm listening yesterday on Thursday to the press conference that Bill Belichick gave, his introductory press conference at the University of North Carolina, there was a reporter who asked, hey, when did you start getting interested in college? Like, at what point did you consider this? Because again, most of the league was not expecting Bill Belichick to go to college for most of his time. And he started off by saying, college came to me. And I was like, all right, sir, congrats. Like, we get it. You won 6 Super Bowls as a head coach, which, by the way, I was cracking up at the University of North Carolina, called him an 8-time Super Bowl champion because of his defensive coordinator one. I'm like, yes, but no, like, calm down. But I think that, yes, everyone would want Bill Belichick, but when he explained it, it actually made a lot of sense. Which he was saying, this wasn't, oh, everyone came to me, asked me to be their head coach. It was more, over the course of the last year, yes, we've seen him very public facing with all the media, but he's also met with a lot of coaches, and he's had college coaches across the ranks, now that he actually has time to meet with them, be like, hey, we want to talk to you about your strategy with 2-minute play. We want to talk to you about your strategy with the tablet on the sideline. We want to talk to you about how you manage the salary cap and how that we can apply that to the portal and to NIL deals. And so he really was talking to all of these different voices on the league, giving his perspective. But of course, when you're giving your perspective in a conversation, you get yours back. On top of that, his son, Steve Belichick, has been working at the University of Washington, and he went out there for a couple weeks and was coaching and getting a sense of that program. And so when he said college came to me, he was essentially saying that most of the NFL isn't really asking for Belichick's opinion for one reason or another. It's a little more complicated than that. I'm not saying no one talked to him. He's got a lot of friends. But when you talk about what was new to him, he really was getting all of this different exposure. And so the way that he's built this program, and he denied this 400-page Bible or any other length of page Bible, but what he was saying is that over the course of the last year, basically unintentionally, he's been taking a crash course in college football landscape, both on the schematic side and on the roster management side. And so the more of this happened, when UNC, where his dad coached, came up and, oh, he could probably bring his son on. No, we don't have that publicly confirmed yet. It was a little more appealing because he was like, wow, look how much I've been thinking about it. Look at all the ways I've thought about getting the most of the system over the last year. I can put that into action now.
I said something on Wednesday that I basically said, I don't see how this works out for either side. And I should have amended that, because there is a thought I have about this whole thing. And listening to Belichick really brought that forward too, is that if this is what Bill Belichick wants to do, he just wants to go coach ball and he's interested in college football and, hey, I want to try something else, good for you, Bill. Go do it. Like, who cares? We talk so much about, and I heard other shows and stuff talking about, like, is he going to ruin his legacy in North Carolina? No, that doesn't happen. How often do we sit here and say, well, I thought Michael Jordan was the greatest player ever, and then he went to the Washington Wizards. Like, that just doesn't
I
happen.
say that
like,
most days.
I mean, I do
Just wake
reference
up,
Fat
like,
Mike. I mean, he got a little pudgy there with the Wizards. Go ahead.
But it doesn't, we all remember him hitting a shot over Byron Russell, right? Like, that's what we remember. We'll remember Bill Belichick winning 6 rings. He's a guy who, look, we all want to tell legends what to do at the end of their careers. Oh, you can't be Willie Mays falling down in the outfield or whatever, right? If Bill Belichick goes to North Carolina and goes 4-8, I'm sure he wouldn't be happy with the results, but he enjoys the challenge of college football. Like, we all were like, well, he ain't sitting in any recruit's home. And somebody asked him about that. And he's like, no, I want to go sit in a recruit's living room and try to convince him to come to school. Like, maybe he just wants to coach ball and he wants a new challenge. And college football's a different deal. It's totally different. And so I give my hats off. Go for it. Do it. Like, it's weird. It's unusual. But if this is what he wants to do, I don't think we should be judging him for it. And I thought in all the public comments and press conference that Jori talked about, he's come off as very much curious about this whole thing and just wanting a new challenge. And it seems very genuine. And I don't think we should be cynical about that. Do I think it's going to work? No, I don't think North Carolina is going to be a very good football team with him. I might be wrong because he is one of the greatest coaches that's ever lived. But who cares? It doesn't even matter. This is what he wants to do. North Carolina obviously will get a benefit out of having one of the greatest coaches of all time on their sideline. So why not? Like, good for you, Bill. I'm glad that he found something that, hey, I'm 72. I probably don't have another shot in the NFL the way I want to have it. I'm just going to go coach college and be happy. Well, like, what's wrong with that?
And to people who think that he's just going to come back to the NFL right away, his line was, I didn't come here to leave here, which was well said.
I believe him, actually. Do you believe him?
I do believe him. And I think what really comes to mind is when Tom Brady started broadcasting, I remember Peter King had a great line when he was talking to people close to Tom Brady. And he said, Tom Brady doesn't do things like halfway. Yes, he might need a little bit of time to grow on the job, but for everyone who thinks he's not going to be any good, he is going to try and he is going to work hard. We'll see where that ends up, but he is going to put that all in because that's just the only way he knows how to operate. And I would say the same thing about Bill Belichick at the college football landscape. We don't know yet what he's going to do, although a lot of NFL people say, hey, his mindset, and I think you guys talked about this on Wednesday, is if anyone can transfer at any time, all these players after 2-3 years are going to be able to go to the NFL draft group and essentially get a projection of where they would go in the draft. And if they don't like where they're projected to go in the draft and they want one more year somewhere where they feel like they can get the best possible coaching, well, Bill Belichick is probably your best option, especially if you're on defense. And so there is going to be a way that he can exploit that based on what he can offer them for NFL readiness. But I think that really when it comes down to it, I don't believe he's going to do anything but like actually work as hard as he can and as smartly as he can to try and win, because that is just how he's wired. So we'll see what the results are. And candidly, I still prefer Greg Olsen broadcast to a Tom Brady broadcast. So I'm not saying that after 12 games, like we're going to feel all the way there. But I do think that to suggest that, oh, he's just going there because he wants to do this or he wants to do that. Like, no, I do think this is a sincere interest in making this program great. And also as an NFC executive told me this week, he can be a change agent in college football in a way that at this point, he's not going to further be in the NFL. Clearly, he has revolutionized parts of the NFL game, and I'm not downplaying that. But I think that when you look at how much the college landscape has changed and people trying to figure it out, are there that many minds you would trust more than Bill Belichick to figure something out in the football landscape? I wouldn't. And on top of that, he's very close with Nick Saban, who had done a version of this, hey, like pro-style program at the college level. Now, he chose when asked about Nick Saban on Thursday to be like, hey, yes, we're very close. I appreciate the question. I'm not going to share my conversations. But given how many conversations he did share, to me, that makes me think even more so that he's going to have Saban in his ear. And that's someone who's been a close friend and a colleague for a long time.
I will just say this, guys. I'll put my college football hat on for a second and ask the question to the world, what is success? Because North Carolina is not a team that right now is anywhere in the conversation for competing for national championships. But they've had some talented players that have made it to Sunday come through that program, and they're in a conference in the ACC that's very winnable. Remember, we were sitting here trying to figure out if anybody was really worthy of the college football playoff, and we're sitting here looking at what SMU looks like and Miami. This is a winnable conference. So to the point of what success looks like for Bill Belichick, if he goes in and wins 9 games a year for North Carolina, which is viable given how bad the ACC is anyway, even if he's just mid-Belichick, can he will them to 9 or 10 games wins a year, which would put them in the conference championship game, which would put them in the college football playoff. And one of the big differences here, if we're honest, is that college football fans at North Carolina aren't the same as college football fans at Bama. Like, you lose 4 games at Bama, the sky is falling, everybody thinks you're terrible, and they're calling for your job. You don't make the playoffs in 1 year, and suddenly you're a hack. At North Carolina, if you consistently make the playoffs, well, that's going to be viewed as tremendous success. So I think we have to also understand that.
What does this have to do with R.J. Davis and our shooting guard situation?
Yeah, right.
This is
the AD was asked on Thursday, can you go all out in football and basketball? Did you guys watch the press conference or no?
A little bit of it, yeah.
I saw snippets, yeah.
Did either of you guys hear his answer when he was asked how he would define success or what success would look like for him?
I did not. What did he say?
Because I thought that he was going to answer and say, win a college championship, like win a title. Because most coaches would be like, that's always the goal. And you don't have to say that we're going to do it, but of course that's the goal. And he didn't say that. And it was kind of an interesting level of humility I wasn't necessarily expecting. He had humility more than I expected, both in terms of his ability to connect with players at that age, as well as what he would win. And what he said about his success is, he goes, success is a day-by-day process. It's being the best we can today, being the best we can tomorrow. That's really the only way to do it. And I know that's like coach speak, but to me, what was notable is not like the content of the coach speak, but the fact that he chose to emphasize process over results. Because I remember when Mike McCarthy got to Dallas and he's like, look, our goal is to win a Super Bowl. And we're all like, wait, did you just say that? And he's like, it's not that crazy. Everyone wants to win a Super Bowl. Right. Bill Belichick was not promising a title. And he was not even necessarily saying that that's how he would characterize success. And so I'm not saying that he doesn't want that or that he doesn't even necessarily internally believe he can get that there. But I thought it was interesting that he was maybe level setting a bit.
Right. And there's something to be said about, like, Fitz, you brought up the example of, okay, this kid wants to play one more year of college football, put himself in position for the NFL. He's a rush linebacker. He's like, well, that guy worked with LT. I'm going to North Carolina. That guy has 15 sacks his senior season, goes and becomes a first-round pick in the NFL for a 6-6 North Carolina team. He goes and sets up his family for the rest of his life. Isn't that success? Like, that's the John Calipari thing, right? Like, he would always say Kentucky, like, yeah, we had a great successful season, even though we lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament, because these 4 guys were first round picks in the NBA draft, and they've changed their families' lives forever. The same thing could apply to Belichick in this. It's just a different world. Look, college football and NFL are just 2 different worlds, right? And I think that maybe the level of joy Belichick might get out of college football will just be different than what it is in the NFL. Like, in the NFL, all that mattered was winning Super Bowls. Maybe he's going to enjoy, like, hey, just maybe going and upsetting, number 3 Clemson team on the road, and we go 8-4, and we go to the Peach Bowl or whatever, Alamo Bowl or whatever it is. Maybe that's successful. Maybe I'm happy with that. Watching the kids rush the field. This doesn't sound like a very Belichickian thing, but who knows? Maybe he finds something out about himself. And I'm just looking forward to it. I think, as cynical as we could be about this, I just think it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be the biggest story in college football next year.
Yeah, and ESPN is going to give North Carolina more TV slots and good opportunities than they have in forever. Like, let's just be honest about that. All right. Jori was at the owners' meetings. Lots to cover. We'll start breaking some of that down. We'll do it next. So, Jori, you were eating croissants with the owners for the last couple of days. That's in my mind what it's like. Like, everybody's just sitting back, and there's just an array of croissants and cream cheese danishes all around everywhere. And you particularly don't eat a lot of that, but in my mind, I'm thinking that you were like breaking bread, like you and Mark Davis sitting there splitting open a gooey chocolate croissant. So, other than croissant eating, what was the overall tone? Like, what was the biggest thing that everybody was focused on at the owners' meetings?
I love your setup of that because I've been allergic to gluten since 2009, so it was in no one's best interest for me to be eating croissants. With
gluten-free croissants? Don't they make
gluten-free croissants?
That is fair. That's fair. But Ian Rappaport from NFL Network. Go ahead.
And gluten-free desserts better than regular desserts. By the way, gluten-free brownies
there's a bunch
better
of
than
fake
regular
stuff
brownies.
in it, so I'm like, just give me a dark chocolate bar and call it a day. I don't need all the fake ingredients.
Gluten-free brownies hit at a different
level.
I did
actually make a great chocolate mousse last week, though, and it was literally just dark chocolate bars and eggs. You don't need all the fake things anyway.
Are we talking about chocolate muffins again? Because, just saying.
Sorry. There will be no chocolate muffin talk.
Our producers do not like when we go over on all of our desserts. But no, the owners' meetings is always really interesting because I love this one because not a lot of reporters go to the December one, and I started going because first 7 years of my career, I was based in Dallas. They're about 30 minutes outside of Dallas. And so I would go and I'm like, oh, all the front office people have to be here for the labor seminar. All the team owners and like their support group, whether that's general counsel or team president, have to come for the owners meetings. This is fantastic. So it was great to be back in Dallas for that and really just run into so many people GMs, directors of pro personnel, player personnel, all that type of stuff. And I think when you go, first of all, yes, Belichick, as we talked about, was really hanging over a lot of this. I think it was kind of interesting to talk to some of the execs being like, how did my team lose so many games this year at the very last minute in weird ways? Like, I've never seen this before. But there were also some interesting elements in terms of, so the competition committee meets and presents at this meeting. And one of the things that most stuck out to me was how they view replay assist, because the game has continued to add to replay assist. And maybe this is so nuance that only, or niche that only I care about. But one of the things they talked about is what do you want to use replay assist for? Because Troy Vincent, who is the head of football operations for the league, was really like, he can say, I believe that I want to use replay assist for these 20 things. And unless team owners agree to it, they can't. And so first of all, face mask. We all remember that Sam Darnold game Thursday night when Sam Darnold is very clearly face mask and we all could see it on the TV, but because the officials had not called it on the field because they couldn't see it from that angle, and I guess it wasn't a reviewable play, it was not called. The Vikings lose a game because of it. Face mask is something that Troy Vincent very much wants to bring before the membership this spring and get that into replay assist. Among the other things he mentioned were hits to defenseless players, tripping, fair catch, illegal double team blocks, and taunting, which I ran into Troy after most people had left, and I was like, Troy, why do we need to focus on taunting for like replay assist? Like, is that really like the most important thing to go after? And he actually gave me a fair answer, which is that the officials need to be spotting the ball and like essentially making sure the next play is happening. And so if they're focused on taunting, which is not getting officiated consistently because they're not always focused on it, then that's a problem. But what was actually really interesting to me in talking with Troy is that when you think about the pipeline for officials, and we all talk about the quality of the officials, and I think that the officials themselves aren't necessarily, it's not that they're incapable of doing it. The league system is just so screwed up. I wrote about this last year. They don't really train them well. They're not having enough of a pipeline. But when you think of replay assist, it's actually even more so because you can get officials from the college game. You can't get replay assist people from the college game because there is no replay assist. And so I'm so fascinated by, one, what the role of replay assist should be, and two, how do you go about training them? But really, I think what it comes down to make it a little more palatable or accessible for our audiences, how do you get plays like the Sam Darnold face mask not to be a problem and not to be officiated incorrectly? And that is, they are going to bring to the team owners this spring this proposal of like, let us get those calls from up top.
My one problem with replay assist, and this is kind of nerdy, so
You only have
bear
one?
with me.
That's actually impressive.
That's not bad, right? Right? You know, I'm not so grumpy about this
I
today.
think Troy Vincent would be thrilled if ownership
Troy
only
Vincent,
had one problem with what he was saying.
Troy Vincent on Wisconsin, by the way. With replay assist, like we'll see it right in the middle of a game where they're like, oh, actually, no, he got the first down yard to gain. That means the coach didn't have to pull out his red flag and challenge the play, right? So all of a sudden this makes it inequitable. Like all of a sudden the coach on the other sideline is like holding his red flag going, well, why doesn't replay assist give me that benefit of the doubt? And I don't have to throw my flag and risk a timeout if you're not going to see this on the replay. So I think it makes it inequitable because all of a sudden, like, why do we replay assist some things, but other things, Andy Reid's got to throw the red flag. And I think that makes it unfair. And it leads, I'm not saying there's conspiracies or anything like that. It's just literally unfair. I think unless there's going to be some kind of a system in place with this, I think you just go with the system you have. You get 2 challenges. If you get them both right, you get a third one. You get a timeout deducted if you don't get a challenge right, because it shouldn't be replay assist for some things, and some things you got to throw the red flag. Like that doesn't seem fair to me. So I don't know how to meld that. But ultimately at the end of the day, I want to get more calls right than to get wrong. So I guess I'm in favor of it. But that's the one part I'm like, well, it's not fair if you're not making some coaches challenge over some calls, but making the other coach challenge over another call that could have been replay assist.
No, and that was one of the questions that was posed to Troy Vincent this week, which is, what is the standard at which you as a league are comfortable with calls coming from upstairs? Because at some point it's going to be like, well, why this one and not that one? And that's something that the membership has to decide. And so the way that Troy put it is the same way you can say like, oh, first you crawl, then you walk, then you jog. Like maybe you start with the head and neck area, which they've kind of already done, and then you expand to face mask, but not yet lower extremity. And then you get to lower extremity and kind of make it more of a gradual insertion. I do think that if you have certain plays that replay assist is always going to be focused on, that is fair. It's weird, but it's fair because everyone is going to be at the mercy of the same system, but it is hard because one team might have a face mask that's really meaningful and the other team might have roughing pass or whatever it is, and one of them's going to be called and one's not. So I think you make a reasonable point, Frank.
Well, there's
Has Charles ever said that on a Friday show?
Never. He's
No,
never said. I've
no.
known Charles for 12 years, and he's never said that. So
Wow.
it could be just out about talking about the food we just ate, and he will be like, "That was not a reasonable take." So I get one time I get a maybe I'll
You're
even get a
welcome.
text after the
I don't know.
show
Maybe
saying
that's bad
you made
content
one
for me
reasonable
to
take.
say that you're reasonable. Maybe people
No,
like it more and you're
like this.
unreasonable.
This is the kumbaya. We started off, a little bit confrontational, but now we're all coming together, and at least Frank gets. C-Rob will tell Frank he's an idiot. C-Rob just looks at me like I'm an idiot. That's all. I just get the look of like, we're gonna move on. That's he at least gets a response. So here's my question or I guess my concern. Let's say it that way. With this process is that it needs to be so clearly defined, and we're going to be asking for Superman Herculean efforts from everybody so quickly. You think about how few seconds there are to look at a play and decide that it's wrong. And in the broadcast, especially if an offense is running with any level of pace, the broadcast will wait and bring that play up another 15 times over the course of the game because they have the luxury of having a whole truck full of people that will take the play, clip the play, look at the play, send it back into production, replay the play. They're not going to have that
How
luxury.
did you not get that wrong at all when you're like play, replay,
Yeah, that's
play?
pretty good. Yeah, that's professional.
Well,
right there.
I'm a pro. Thank you very much. The problem with this is the fans are going to believe that some things are being clipped and some things aren't. Some things are being looked at. There's not going to be any level of human sort of benefit of the doubt in any of this. We're just going to expect that everything's going to be right. And then we're going to also look at it when it's going particularly quickly. Then there's going to be why isn't this being reviewed? Why isn't that being reviewed? It's just, I fear that they're opening up Pandora's box in a winless situation. And then I'm left to wonder something that you guys have stressed over the years that I think is a really important part of this. Will the owners ever vote in something that is actually such a small part of the game? Like, how many games are actually impacted by these missed calls? How many actual outcomes are changed? So then will the majority of owners sit around and say, we have a problem that this clearly fixes, and it fixes such a massive problem that it is worth making a change for? So often, if it only affects one or two plays out the course of the season, owners don't care.
If it only affects one or two regular season plays. Once it becomes a playoff issue, that's when the owners start to care. So we
Fair.
saw this with the overtime rules a few years ago.
God.
Only
Josh
one
Allen
team
doesn't
getting
touch
the
the ball, so
ball.
we change
And
everything
the
about
owners were like,
overtime,
no,
yeah.
but this is football. But okay, fine, we'll change it for the playoffs so we don't have the most important games of the year decided by this. And so I think that's really what's going to be interesting as we go through the next couple months is, are any of the playoff games decided by something like that Sam Darnold face mask? And if so, you better believe that there's going to be changes coming.
But isn't that shades of the missed pass interference for the Saints that became a huge part of, then all of a sudden trying to look at how to fix the pass interference calls only to figure out the pass interference can't really be fixed? Like, I don't know.
If we're being honest here, the Saints were never going to be a compelling, the league and the Saints had a lot of issues through the years, so they weren't the ones who were going to get a real change.
Again, that's also I just think we have to at some point acknowledge that technology has gotten to the point where we sitting at home have angles, replays, views, slow motion. We have so many things that human beings simply can't have on the field. And I know nobody here ever likes to be sympathetic towards refs, but I would challenge you, try it. Go to a Pop Warner game and just try and officiate Pop Warner game once. It is so, I've had the luxury in my life of standing on the sidelines and watching an SEC network exercise for officiating where they had analysts go out and try and officiate the game. And watching that happen was just, it's a reminder of how much we're asking. And I think what we fail to realize sometimes as a society is that our technology at home can never be actually replicated with the human beings that are on the field in a way that ever puts the human beings on the field in an advantage. We're always going to think that they're incompetent no matter what, when the reality of it is we're looking at a replay 47 times that's in triple slow-mo.
It's very impressive that they get as many things right as they do. Like, that's the honest God truth. We could sit here and complain about officiating and all that. If you've ever stood on the sidelines of an NFL game, and I know we all have, the game moves at the speed of light. Like, it is amazing how fast it is at field level. Like, I'll be down there and be like, oh my God, what a crazy play. And then the PA guy is like, gain of 2. It's like, oh, okay. It is. I don't know how coaches even stand on the sideline and understand the game. So asking a referee to get everything right, like you said, all the different replay angles, everybody watching. There's some calls that are obvious, right? Like, those are the ones we complain about. But yes, I remember the replacement refs. We all do. It could get a lot worse. It could get a lot worse in the NFL, but there's room for it to get better too.
No, Frank, I think your point also is really relevant when we think about what happened with the Bears last week, because Thomas Brown had been an offensive coordinator from the booth, and that's where he felt like he saw the game the best to call the plays. And he's like, oh, now I need to be down on the sideline because I'm the interim head coach, and I need to be talking to the officials and all of that, and it makes a difference.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing down low, that close. Like, you're like, oh, my God. Like, it's just unbelievable how fast that game is.
Isn't that why it would actually make sense to add an extra official to every single game that just sits in the booth? Like,
see, Fitz, the problem is that you are assuming that the NFL ownership is willing to fund what Troy Vincent and the people in charge of officiating want to do. And I wrote in my story last year, I guess it was the beginning of this year, where it was like, hey, every single year it's an item on, hey, can we increase the budget here? And it pretty much always gets shot down.
And we already get too many we already get too many penalties. Like we do.
I mean,
like Al Michaels complains about it every Thursday night.
Well,
everyone but Tom Brady, who's not allowed to complain about it, complains about it.
He's the only one. He's like,
you mean Raiders owner Tom Brady? All right, but let me ask this: like, how much money are we really talking about, Jori? Give me a ballpark. How much are we to add an extra official to every game? What? I mean, we're not talking that much.
It's not about that. It's actually probably not about their salaries, and it's more about the system involved to train them and recruit them and all of that.
I guess I hear that, but also I sit there and think, my God, you could add $3 to every season ticket in the country. Like, if you're really worried about cash, you could add $3 to every season ticket. What do you know? Suddenly, like, I'm out there.
Don't give them any ideas.
I had this in my story last year where I had someone, an assistant coach in the league, who was like, David Tepper got fined $300,000 for throwing a drink on a fan. Why don't we just put that money toward officiating?
Look, they're about to start charging surcharges in New York, right, for driving in busy streets that they're going to use to fix the subway. I love this. Charge things to fix things. Like, I'm all in for, like, go ahead and add all sorts of extra cash to the NFL coffers. All right. Was there anything else of note? I want to make sure that we don't miss anything from the owners' meeting. Was there anything else that stood out that you want to give secrets to the world on?
The one other tidbit I found interesting is, so this week, for the first time, NFL teams got approval to sell stakes of their team to private equity. That's something we've seen in other leagues, but not in the NFL. And so now both the Bills and the Miami Dolphins have a portion of their team's non-controlling interest that was sold to private equity. And one of the things that's interesting is because I was talking to an NFC executive and I was like, why should we care? And the executive said, look, when you look at the Bills are trying to build a new stadium. They need something like $2.1 billion. And their most recent estimate, this was like late November, came in about $560 million over budget. Well, there are different ways you could do that. You could say we're going to take out debt, or you can say, well, we're just going to sell the amount of the team that we need to be able to finance that. And now we can pay for the stadium more readily and without the issues. So you're kind of essentially just giving up some of that revenue in the future that you'll eventually would have had to handle because of debt. And so I don't think this is going to be a model for everyone. Like the Bears, for example, who have been needing a stadium for a while and failing to find a place and a funding model for it. This probably isn't going to work for them, but it will be interesting to see, now that we have this financial flexibility in team ownership, if that can impact stadium renovations and just new stadiums generally.
Yeah, I think this is wild, by the way. And again, I'll wear my favorite team hat for a second. While the Raiders don't need a new stadium, to watch Mark Davis systematically selling off small portions of the team to make himself boatloads of money, I think we have to understand that valuations on NFL teams have absolutely skyrocketed to levels that I don't believe even owners could have anticipated 5, 10, 15 years ago. When we ask ourselves why Roger Goodell still has a job when everybody yells at Roger Goodell all the time, simply look at the profitability. Like, he's a shield for the owners, and the owners continue to make money at just alarming rates. And it hit me the other day. I was doing an interview with the station that was asking me about, Raiders ownership because of the sell-offs. And I mean, you just think about a team that was worth $500 million not that long ago is now worth billions of dollars, and an owner is selling off small percentage stakes while he maintains the majority ownership stake and control of the franchise, and just lining his pockets with hundreds of millions of dollars of cash. Like, it just feels like if I'm an owner and I'm sitting around and I need a little bit of money, or I want a little bit of money. Like, this is almost like, Frank, it's like running a stock portfolio at some point where you're saying, okay, I realize I've got all of this. I'm just going to sell a little of it out now, have myself a merry little Christmas, and it doesn't really change my life. And it lets a bunch of people feel like they're NFL owners.
So when are you going to buy a part of the Raiders? Because I know you got all those millions sitting around from your music days. So
have you watched
1%, 2%?
The behind the music stuff on musicians? Like I don't, my record label made
I
a lot
want the
of money
behind
off
the
of
music
it.
Jason Fitz. Me and Jori are going to be executive producers on behind the music. Jason Fitz.
I'm going to need Mark Davis to give me just a very like he's going to have to give me the Tom Brady discount in order to get me into this thing, and I don't think that's going to happen.
Wouldn't.
He should,
he should.
I'm all for it. Yeah,
one step at a time.
I think when it comes down to just if you're saying why do I care who owns 10% of my team or 20% of my team, the answer is if your team needs a new stadium and that is a problem, that might be a route to do that. And then the other thing that was just a little bit interesting, I would say, from NFL meetings is that Roger Goodell was asked about Jay-Z and the allegations against him that he raped a 13-year-old in 2000. And I think it was interesting because not only does the NFL partner with Roc Nation, Jay-Z's company, on music and initiatives such as selecting who's going to perform at the halftime of the Super Bowl and producing that halftime show, but they also partner on social justice initiatives, and so that could become a little complicated. But as of now, Jay-Z strongly denied those and kind of went after the lawyer, who, by the way, the lawyer who has been filing these cases is also the lawyer who is filing the cases against Deshaun Watson, so that's a little bit NFL relevant, and said that they're aware of the civil allegations and Jay-Z's strong response to them, and they have no plans to change that partnership, and they're moving forward with Super Bowl preparations. So I know that is relevant today for some people who are following that news.
Yeah, that's and Tony Busby is certainly a name that NFL fans have become used to in this process. We will see how that process plays out. All I ask in these situations, I constantly say this, like, if these allegations are true, there's a victim. So let's be respectful of that. If these allegations are not true for any reason, there's still a victim. So let's be respectful of that. You don't lose anything in these situations by stepping back and waiting until we get as much information as possible without suddenly taking some way to create an even worse situation for the victim on either side of this situation. So I beg patience from all of us that listen to this show when you're coming in and making up your mind. There's a lot of legal process left to play out, and patience in the legal process actually doesn't hurt most people involved in it. So that's what I would beg for. Thank you. Look, see, every once in a while, Jori's like, I didn't know he had it in him. And now I made Emmy beep out a swear. There we go.
Yeah, I'll include you in every group text after that.
Well, one step at a time. Just one group text would be nice. It's fine. It's fine. Emmy's doing God's work, as I always say on this show, behind the scenes. Emmy spectacularly going to edit out my swear, and we appreciate her help in this entire process. Watch us on social media. I don't know how you watch us, but follow us on social media and be sure you're hanging out with Inside Coverage. Remember, we have episodes Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. So we've got stuff for you all week long. We'll be back to our regular schedule next week. So Jori gets to come back to Wednesdays, which are much more friendly than Fridays, which are feisty. But most importantly, rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, family, enemies. Tell everybody to hang out with us every single episode. We appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for listening.